Round 3 of the FIDE Women's Candidates 2026, and the race at the top is razor-tight. Bibisara Assaubayeva came in joint leader alongside Grandmaster Logno, and she made sure she stayed there, grinding down Jiner in a complex Sicilian that swung back and forth before Black's queen and bishop delivered the knockout. 2 of the 4 games in this round were decisive, 2 ended in draws. And the standings remain impossibly close heading into round 4. Jiner, the Chinese Grandmaster rated 2578, is a dynamic attacker who loves sharp, imbalanced positions. Bibisara Assaubayeva from Kazakhstan, rated 2516, is equally combative and arguably the informed player of this tournament, having won her first 2 games. Both players needed a win, Zhu to get off the mark after a sluggish start, and Assaubayeva to cement her place at the summit. Zhu opens with the Nyajmetdinav Rossolimo attack, a fianchetto-free way to fight the Sicilian, where white pins the knight on c6 early with the bishop to b5. This system, popularized by Mikhail Botvinnik and later refined by players like Magnus Carlsen and Wes Lee, SOH, avoids the main-line open Sicilian entirely. The key strategic idea is to keep the position solid and fight for the d4 square while keeping the game out of Black's heavily prepared theory. The king's pawn, Zhu stakes her claim in the center immediately, the most combative first move in chess and the one that gives white the greatest range of options. Stockfish evaluates this at plus 0.5, a slight edge as expected, and Assaubayeva fires back with the Sicilian defense, the most popular and arguably most combative reply to e4 at the highest level. Black immediately fights for the d4 square without mirroring white's pawn structure, signaling her intent to play for a win. Knight to f3, the natural developing move, white controls the d4 and e5 squares and prepares to continue with the Rossolimo setup, keeping all options open. This avoids any early theoretical battles in the open Sicilian. Black develops the knight to its most active square, pressuring the e4 pawn and preparing to meet the coming bishop pin. This is the Sicilian's most natural reply and the move that invites the Rossolimo treatment. And here it is, bishop to b5, the Rossolimo attack. White pins the knight on c6 and immediately threatens to trade it off, potentially leaving Black with a doubled pawn on c6. This system sidesteps the main-line Sicilian entirely and keeps the game in strategically rich but less charted territory. Black plays d6, solidifying the center and preparing to unpin by developing the bishop to d7. This is one of the most popular responses in the Rossolimo, leading to structures similar to the classical Sicilian. White castles kingside immediately, prioritizing king safety before committing to any central action. The rook on f1 will become useful as the game opens up. Assaubayeva develops the bishop to d7, unpinning the knight on c6 and preparing to potentially swap the bishop for the b5 bishop or reroute it. This is the thematic response in this structure. White reinforces the e4 pawn by placing the rook on e1, preparing to meet any central counterplay and keeping the position solid. This is a useful prophylactic move in Rossolimo structures. Knight to f6, Black develops her second knight, attacks the e4 pawn, and completes the basic development of her minor pieces. The position now resembles a classical Sicilian structure, a useful prophylactic move, preventing any bishop intrusion on g4 after Black's knight lands on f6. White also keeps options open for a later g4 kingside push without worrying about a pin on the f3 knight. Assaubayeva nudges the bishop with a6, forcing White to clarify her intentions with the b5 bishop. This is a classic Sicilian idea. Black gains time and space by questioning the bishop's position. Zhu retreats the bishop all the way back to f1, a surprising but entirely sound idea. The bishop had done its job of delaying Black's development and now returns home to be rerouted later, perhaps via e2 or d3. This is a known plan in the Rossolimo. A very aggressive and somewhat unusual move. Assaubayeva places the rook on g8, signaling her intent to launch a kingside pawn storm with g5 and g4. She is clearly playing for the attack and not castling kingside. White solidifies her center with d3, choosing a king's Indian attack-like setup. The position is now closing to a strategic battle, with White building steadily while Black prepares her kingside offensive. A preparatory pawn advance, Black covers the g5 square against any knight intrusion and prepares to advance with g5 at the right moment. Assaubayeva is building up her attack methodically. Zhu strikes on the queenside with b4, opening the b-file and challenging black's c5 pawn. This is a principled counterattack. White fights for space on the side where she is stronger while black prepares her kingside play. The position is now a true double-edged battle. Black captures on b4, accepting the pawn exchange and opening the c-file for her own counterplay. The structure is beginning to shift in interesting ways. White plays a3, challenging the b4 pawn and trying to undermine black's advanced queenside structure. This is a standard follow-up to the b4 push in such positions. Assaubayeva refuses to give up the pawn and pushes it to b3, where it becomes a genuine thorn in white's position. This passed pawn on b3 will require constant attention from Zhu for the rest of the game. White develops her knight to d2, connecting the rooks and preparing to deal with the b3 pawn. The knight on d2 can later hop to c4 or f1 as needed, and here comes the kingside storm. Black advances g5, the pawn that was always coming. Assaubayeva makes clear she is going for a full-scale attack on white's king. The game is now a race. White opens up the center with d4. A principled break that challenges black's pawn structure and seeks to open lines before the kingside attack gets going. This is the right philosophy, fight back in the center. Black pushes g4 immediately, refusing to be distracted by the central complications and pressing the attack forward. The tension is now extremely high on both flanks. Zhu captures on g4, opening the h-file for her rook and releasing some of the kingside tension. Now the h-file becomes a potential avenue for white's rook to become active as well. Assaubayeva recaptures with the bishop, placing it on the very active g4 square where it eyes the f3 knight and puts pressure on white's position. The bishop is now a dominant piece in the center of the board. White activates the light-squared bishop on b2, pointing it toward the center and the kingside along the long diagonal. This is a useful developing move that also supports the d4 pawn. Black plays d5, and this is a mistake according to Stockfish, swinging the evaluation from plus 1.3 to minus. Wait, actually the eval moves to plus 1.3 for white. Black was better served keeping the position closed. Advancing d5 releases central tension and allows white to consolidate rather than giving black the initiative she needs to press her attack. Stockfish marks this as an error, with the evaluation jumping to plus 1.3 for white. Zhu responds with c4, closing the center and gaining space. With the d5 pawn now blocked, white has successfully stabilized the position, and the b3 pawn is still a nuisance, but less dangerous. Black captures on e4, another decision the engine flags as a mistake. Opening the position when behind in development and without the king safely tucked away is risky. Stockfish's advantage for white jumps here, as the center opens up to white's benefit rather than black's. White recaptures with the knight on e4, posting it on a powerful central outpost. The knight on e4 is very strong and controls key squares in the center of the board. Black captures the knight on e4. The engine marks this as a mistake as well. The position after this exchange allows white to activate her rook powerfully, and the evaluation climbs further in white's favor. Black's position is becoming increasingly difficult to coordinate. White recaptures with the rook on e4, a beautifully active rook, now dominating the open e-file. Stockfish gives white a plus 1.5 advantage here, and the position looks very comfortable for Zhu. Black moves the bishop to f5, trying to exchange it for the powerful rook on e4. However, the engine notes this as inaccurate. The bishop on f5 is somewhat exposed, and white can simply retreat the rook to a safer square without difficulty. White retreats the rook to e3, maintaining its activity on the e-file while dodging the bishop. The rook on e3 is well placed and keeps options open. The bishop dives to c2, an aggressive intrusion behind white's lines, targeting the queen and causing disruption. The engine marks this as a mistake because the bishop, while threatening, can be chased away without too much difficulty, and black still lacks coordination. White plays qc1, unpinning from the bishop's attack and keeping everything under control. A calm, precise response that shows Zhu's understanding of the position. Assaubayeva activates her rook on c8, adding more pressure along the c-file. The engine flags this as a mistake. The position required more precise play to maintain equality. White's advantage grows further here. And now everything changes. Zhu advances d5, but this is the move where the advantage slips from her hands. The evaluation swings from plus 1.1 for white all the way to minus 0.2, essentially turning the game around. Instead of consolidating her advantage, White creates a passer that becomes black's target and releases central tension in black's favor. This was the critical moment where Zhu let the win slip away. The knight leaps to a5. Repositioning to attack the c4 pawn and creating new threats. Assaubayeva seizes on the new dynamics and begins to regroup her pieces effectively. White retreats the knight to d2, defending against the threats and trying to reorganize. The position has become murky and roughly equal according to the engine. Assaubayeva's rook swings to g4, suddenly becoming a very active piece. The rook threatens along the fourth rank and coordinates well with the other pieces to create genuine counterplay. Zhu plays the bishop to e5, but this turns out to be a significant error, with Stockfish's evaluation swinging from -0.9 all the way to -0.9 for black. The bishop on e5 is active but misplaced in this moment, and Assaubayeva finds the right response to exploit it. White needed a more careful defensive approach here. Black plays h5, the engine marks this as a mistake, calling for more precise play. The h-pawn advance is ambitious but creates some weaknesses, and White could have regrouped. Nevertheless, Assaubayeva is playing energetically and keeping the pressure on. White repositions the queen to b2, eyeing the g7 square and trying to coordinate her pieces. The queen on b2 also supports the b3 pawn situation and activates along the long diagonal. The bishop retreats to h6, tucking away from any immediate tactics while remaining a useful piece that covers key squares. Assaubayeva is carefully managing her piece placement. White doubles rooks on the e-file with Ray1, maximizing pressure on the e-file and the e6 square. This looks very threatening, but Assaubayeva has a resource ready. Black sacrifices, or rather exchanges, the bishop on e3, simplifying the position and trading off one of White's active rooks. This exchange helps to reduce some of White's firepower. White recaptures with the rook, keeping the rook active on the third rank. The position has simplified somewhat but remains complex. The knight pounces on c4. Assaubayeva grabs the pawn, winning material and further complicating the position. The knight on c4 is a powerful piece, and black is now fighting back actively. White recaptures the knight immediately, maintaining rough material balance. The position continues to be complex, with pawns and pieces scattered across the board. Assaubayeva recaptures with the c8 rook, bringing more forces into the game and maintaining pressure. Both players are now maneuvering in a sharp position. White captures the rook with the bishop, clearing some of the tension and trying to simplify toward a manageable endgame. Black's remaining rook takes on c4, and now Assaubayeva has a rook on the fourth rank with the bishop on h6 and the passed b3 pawn, all contributing to a dangerous setup. White's d5 passer and e5 bishop provide some compensation. Zhu advances the d passer to d6, pushing it deep into black's territory. This pawn is very advanced and creates real problems for black's king coordination. Black plays e6, blocking the dangerous d6 passer and stabilizing the kingside structure. This is a logical defensive move that keeps the passed pawn under control. And now Zhu makes a serious mistake, bishop to h2. The evaluation swings dramatically from near equality to -1.8 in black's favor. The bishop retreats to a passive square on h2, doing very little, and the initiative shifts completely to Assaubayeva. White needed to keep the bishop active on e5 or find another plan to maintain the tension. The queen springs to g5, a massive swing of 4.8 pawns according to Stockfish. Assaubayeva misses an even stronger continuation, but qg5 is still very powerful, centralizing the queen with tempo and creating multiple threats simultaneously. The evaluation goes to -2.6 for black, and the game is now firmly in Assaubayeva's favor. White rushes the bishop back to e5, trying to defend and threaten back. Zhu is scrambling to find counterplay, but the position is already very difficult. The bishop crashes into e4, a massive swing of 7.5 pawns as Stockfish evaluates black now at -4.0. The bishop on e4 is an absolute monster, centralized and threatening in every direction. White's position is becoming critical as her king is increasingly exposed. Zhu plays f4, trying to kick the bishop away and create some counterplay, but this only opens up more lines toward her own king. The rook delivers check on c1, a 9-pawn swing in terms of evaluation impact. Assaubayeva's pieces are swarming around White's king with devastating effect. The king is forced to move, and the position falls apart for White. The king steps to h2, the only legal retreat. White is now under serious pressure with her king exposed and black's pieces fully coordinated for the final assault. The queen delivers check on h4, a 10-pawn swing in the evaluation. Assaubayeva is hunting the king with her queen and bishop working in perfect harmony. White's defensive resources are evaporating. Zhu interposes the rook on h3, blocking the check and trying to create a defensive barrier, but this is only a temporary measure. Black's rook sacrifices itself on h1, a stunning move. This rook sack is the engine's top choice and clears the way for a devastating queen attack. The evaluation remains at -5, and white must accept the rook. White captures the rook. There is no choice. The king is dragged into the open and is now completely vulnerable to black's remaining forces. The queen swoops in to take the rook on h3 with check, a 10-pawn evaluation swing. Assaubayeva has sacrificed material to expose the king and now recaptures with check, keeping the initiative alive. The attack is relentless. The king flees to g1, the only move. White's position is completely desperate as the king has nowhere safe to go. Check again, queen to e3 with a 10.6-pawn evaluation swing. Assaubayeva is relentless, checking at every opportunity and giving white no time to organize a defense. The king is being driven across the board. Zhu plays qf2, interposing the queen to block the check. This is the only way to keep fighting, but it leads to an endgame where black's advantage remains overwhelming. Assaubayeva captures the queen on f2 with check, a 10.9-pawn evaluation swing, trading queens and heading into a winning endgame. Black has bishop, pawns, and the far more active king position to convert the advantage. White takes the queen, entering a king and pawn endgame with a bishop. The evaluation is -4.7 for white. The endgame is completely lost, but Zhu plays on, hoping for a miracle. Black advances the h-pawn to h4, a 10.2-pawn evaluation swing, pushing the passed pawn forward. The h4 pawn and the b3 pawn combine with the bishop to create an unstoppable force. White cannot deal with all the threats simultaneously. White plays g4, trying to blockade the h-pawn and create some counterplay with her own pawn mass. This is a desperate attempt to complicate the position. Assaubayeva advances b5, pushing another pawn forward with an 11-pawn evaluation swing. The queenside pawns are now marching forward alongside the kingside pawns, and white's king simply cannot stop everything at once. The king retreats to g1, trying to regroup and deal with the advancing pawns, but there is simply too much for white to handle in this position. The h-pawn marches to h3 with a 10.6-pawn evaluation swing, now dangerously close to promotion. White's king must rush back but cannot be everywhere at once. White's king moves to h2, chasing the dangerous h-pawn, but this leaves the queenside pawns unattended. The bishop retreats to g2, supporting the h3 pawn from behind and creating a beautiful partnership between the bishop and the passed pawns. An 11.1-pawn evaluation swing confirms black is completely winning. White's king attacks the bishop, trying to win time, but Assaubayeva has everything under control. Another queenside pawn advances a5, a 12.5-pawn evaluation swing. Assaubayeva is advancing all her pawns in a coordinated wave that white simply cannot stop. The b3, b5, a5, and h3 pawns all demand white's attention simultaneously. White's king returns to h2, back to chasing the dangerous h-pawn and bishop combination. Zhu is in a completely lost position, simply shuffling her king. Assaubayeva brings her king into the game, a 13.3-pawn evaluation swing. The king marches toward the d6 pawn to deal with the only real white counterplay. With the king activated, the conversion is simply a matter of technique. White's king chases the bishop again, but there is nothing left to fight for. The position is completely resignable. The a-pawn marches to a4, a 14-pawn evaluation swing and the final move of the game. With 4 advanced passed pawns on the queenside and kingside, the bishop on g2 supporting them all, and the king marching in, Zhu resigned. Assaubayeva has delivered a stunning victory to maintain her share of the lead. This game was ultimately decided by 2 factors: Zhu's 29th move, bishop to h2, which surrendered her advantage in a winning position, and Assaubayeva's relentless queen and bishop coordination that exposed the white king. The passed pawns on both flanks in the in-game were simply unstoppable. A magnificent fighting performance from the Kazakh player who remains at the top of the standings. And that wraps up the decisive game from round 3 of the FIDE women's candidates. Assaubayeva and Logno lead the field on 2 points each, with a massive chasing pack just half a point behind. Round 4 promises even more fireworks as the tension at the top continues to mount. Let us know in the comments who you think will ultimately claim the candidate's title, and if you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a round.